All right.
Alrighty.
Here we go. We are a few minutes late, for which we make no apologies because a wizard shows up whenever he means to.
Exactly. And if there's two things that we are, it's wizards and intentional.
Yes. But because we are late, we're going to be sensitive to everybody's time. I'm going ahead and just like setting up the thing on the YouTubes and the whatnot. We will dispense with our normal frivolities because we all know that you don't like it when we just act like humans at the very beginning. You want to get into the main discussion, so we're just going to get into the main discussion.
You only like us for what we give you.
That's right.
You don't actually care to know us as persons.
No, ortho automatons.
Which is fine because there's not really much going on anyway. So we're not really persons of any real caliber anyway.
That's true.
It's fine. It's really fine. So shall we just get to it then?
Yeah, we're just going to say that we have done the follow-up, which we really haven't, but we're going to say that we did.
Consider yourself followed up with.
Yes.
Today,
and like it.
Today we're talking about WandaVision.
Yeah. Which is a little bit of a... Yes, so many of them. I know we said in our last episode, there they are. I know we said in our last episode we were going to do Atlanta. And we will.
So hold your horses, everybody.
Yes, if you have a Shetland pony and you can actually physically hold it, that might be your best bet. If you have a Clydesdale, stand far away from the hind hooves.
Yes.
But we will get to Atlanta. WandaVision finished on this past Friday. Actually, today's Wednesday in the real sort of like streaming world, and WandaVision just finished. So we felt like it's fresh. It's got that pop culture umami. It's still very
a certain je ne sais quoi.
Yeah. It's got that wok hey, if I can use an Uncle Rogerism for another YouTube channel that I enjoy. Anyway. Uncle Roger. It's a funny sort of like comedy YouTube channel. He talks about like walks and whatever. Neither here nor there. We are not persons of substance. We are beyond the porg. We are beyond the protective curtain of the porg.
So why don't you go ahead then, Stephen, and spoil us with some porgalicious spoilers.
I enjoyed it very, very much. I thought that it was a really good show. I thought that it didn't end particularly strongly, but I thought that it was a very solid show. Otherwise, did I not ask your question?
So how did you feel about it?
Well, so I'll tell you what happened. WandaVision is the latest in the.
Well, what happened was
WandaVision is the latest in the unfolding adventures of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So this series follows the family life of Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch, as she is revealed to be, although we kind of knew who she was, right, for a while, and the Vision. And if you may be confused by that and wondering, like, wait a minute, I saw the Avengers Endgame cinema. The Vision is dead. You are right. He is dead. And that's part of the...
dead. So, Chad, the Vision is dead. The Vision is dead.
Just the claps.
I wish that he was not dead.
Just the claps. Just the claps. Anyway, Homestar Runner. So yeah, the Vision is dead. But what the series is, especially at the beginning, like you get into episode 1, and it's Wanda and the Vision in some sort of like 1950s black and white. Even the aspect ratio on the screen is a square. It's like an old TV show. And what you see is that what we learn later is that Wanda has actually taken control of a town in New Jersey and created some sort of imaginary idealized world. And she is processing the death of Vision through pop culture. She is basically the Abed Nadir of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's very, it's very cool. And so she creates this like this bubble around the town, everything that is inside, like she is somehow controlling with her Scarlet Witch powers. But there's another witch who infiltrates. It was Agatha all along, Agatha Harkness, who wants to steal her powers. And that actually sort of becomes the climactic final scene. And Wanda and Agatha have to fight at the end. And Wanda has to decide whether she wants to end this imaginary world and process her grief or continue to sort of deal in this solution.
Wanda has to decide to do that.
Wanda has to.
Agatha doesn't do any grieving. She's just
bad. She bad.
She real bad.
She bad. So did I miss anything? Is that basically it?
No. Yeah, that's the meat and potatoes. of it all.
No, last week, not this week. Not this week.
That was the cheese and the macaroni. Cheese and macaroni sounds like a different dish than macaroni and cheese. It sounds like you're having just like cheese by itself,
the side of macaroni,
and then just macaroni, like buttered noodles or something. Doesn't it? It sounds like a different thing to me.
Yeah, I picture just like
less interesting
cubes of Velveeta with a side of like elbow noodles just piled high.
Velveeta cubes.
Yeah, it's not even real cheese.
It's like just gelatinous wobbliness. Like blah, 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 blah. That's what that's you. It's like cheese flavored Jello. Sick.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm sorry, I regret that.
Make a brain mold
so
of it.
So this show was a show that was a show, and we watched it. Yeah. Overall, I would say that it had some TV-like elements to it.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was really I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great installment in the MCU, and added some different different colors in an otherwise, I think, fairly black and white world that they've painted between like good and evil and stuff like that.
Formulaic.
And so I thought that they added some certain kinds of complexity to it, and then in the last like 10 minutes of the show completely undid that. It's like, wait a minute, what? But I still really was glad I watched it. You know, like it didn't leave me feeling like too upset or anything about it. But I was just like, well, all right. I think that was how I felt at the end. Like, all right.
Yeah.
What do you think about it?
Kind of similar. So I remember like the experience. I binged this actually like 2 weeks ago. I think I watched episodes 1 through 8 like in one sitting. And
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's how I roll. When I watched the first episode, I was like, okay, something special is happening here. Like this is interesting. Those first maybe 4 episodes, maybe 5 episodes, right? Those kind of TV homages, the Brady Bunch and the whatever. I'm like, this is amazing. Because you know what's happening. There's that moment in the 3rd episode, I think, where you have a flash of the Vision's like dead face with the sunken in forehead, right? Like you have these like reality is beginning to come through. It's like, oh man, this is amazing stuff. And then it becomes kind of Marvel-y, which honestly was a little bit of a letdown. And it felt like we sort of shifted to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or something rather than WandaVision, this thing that they were building. It was still good. It was still fun. I agree with you on the letdown. For me, like I remember at the end of this, she leaves and it's like, so Wanda just gets to enslave this population in New Jersey and then walk away.
Yeah, totally. And not only that, but then, and we'll talk more about this, but then to be painted as a hero.
Yeah.
For doing that. Like they'll never know what you sacrificed for them. Like what?
Your imagination?
What? Like, listen, I don't know why they're so mad at you. Like you've been going through some stuff.
Yeah.
It's like,
did you hear what those people said every time they came to themselves? Like, please kill us. Why don't you kill us? This is excruciating. Like we're having your nightmares. Like she was torturing these people for weeks or months, whatever it was.
Yeah.
And then she went on vacation to a seaside town.
Yes. I feel like Monica is just like, it's cool. You've been going through a lot.
Yeah.
Like if I like tortured my children because I was going through a lot,
that wouldn't work. That would not work.
Still be torture.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that stuff was weird. That stuff was weird.
Well, that's what I was saying. Like they brought in this weird black and white thing back to it, right? Where like she's just a hero, and like she gets, because she has all this power, she gets to fly away.
Yeah. Which is funny because she grew up in Sokovia, right? To dig into like the backstory of who Wanda Maximoff is. Like she sees what it's like to be the collateral damage of the heroes who were, Stark Industries dropping bombs and, these other sort of like
literally in her house.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, again, it didn't make sense. I feel like wasn't even true to that character, let alone the larger sort of story that they were building. But like, yeah, it's okay. So they tripped over the finish line. Overall, it was still fun. Some of the episodes I thought were amazing. But I don't know. let's get into it, because what are we gonna do?
Yeah. So obviously, I think like the place to start with it is the most kind of pressing element of all of it, or I get like the central component, right, is grief.
Yeah.
There definitely, I think there's some really interesting elements, and this is where I felt like the show was really incredible, right? Was that, you know, I don't feel like you normally see grief dealt with the way that they dealt with it in this show. You know, it can become, you know, like I think about some of the other characters. I mean, grief is a big part of like superhero stories, right? Like there's like someone who's lost someone, you know, like think about Spider-Man, right? Who loses Uncle Ben.
Yeah.
And like his grief like fuels him towards justice, right? Punisher, right? Loses his wife and kids, and he's fueled toward like vigilante, kind of like revenge, right?
Yeah. He goes
so there's
crazy.
some, yes, Frank Castle is a scary dude. But here, you know, I think what you really kind of get is a much more, I think, whole picture of grief, right? Because I do think it's there's a dark side to it. There's a dark side to grief. It's not just like, you know, sadness. That's not what I mean. But like the way that what happens when we carry all that pain, like we act out, you know, and like here she was with all this power, like, and she acted out in a very big way. Right. And it really caused a lot of harm to other people by her unwillingness to process and manage her grief. So, and not manage, like process, like to process her grief, to work through it. So yeah, I don't know. I thought that was interesting because it is such a natural part of like being human, grieving stuff. And the only way really to deal with grief is to feel it. Like that really is it. There's no, you can't like shortcut it or anything like that. You have to go through it.
Yeah. The only way forward is through, really. And it's true. Like she builds this, and again, I think it's worth underscoring because it is kind of shocking. Like she creates that. She doesn't just kind of live in her own mind in terms of the illusion that she, you know, because some of us, when we refuse to process a negative emotion like grief, we can sort of, you know, exist in denial. We can have kind of our own like mental constructs. She builds a 5 square mile like imaginary construct around herself. You know, she walks to this property that she purchased apparently to like live in with Vision, right? That becomes the nucleation site of all of this. It's nothing but a bare foundation. She imagines this idealized house. You know, the waves of sort of like Wanda control emanate outward from there, and they like possess everybody and everything within their radius. You know, it's destructive. It's kind of this very like enfleshed lie that she propagates over onto the world. Like nothing is what it is. People lose their freedom. Like the whole thing becomes this elaborate lie, because grief is this thing that like needs to be denied. You know, in the same way that the movie theater goes from being a kind of rundown whatever to a 1950s cinema, right? The FBI trucks become ice cream trucks. Like all of it just kind of gets this sort of spit shine on top of it to make it wholesome and pleasant and light. Go ahead.
You.
Well, and then I think like the contrast of that, right? Like when she finally begins to process it, you actually even get like a deeper sense of the beauty of grief, because it's only at the end, right, when Vision tells her, what is grief if not love persevering, right? Like you get a vision of grief when she actually, no pun intended, when she's having that conversation with Vision and she steps into it, she experiences it. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's like, you know, one of the things that is a big lesson, I think. And plus I thought that there was, we can talk more about like power and all of that kind of stuff and like how that impacts what we do with our pain. Right.
Yeah.
So but I do feel like this idealizing is one way of kind of like looking away from the pain. Right. So, and I think we do the same thing in our lives too. Like if there's a person or a time or a past or something that we've lost, right? Like I mean, how often do we like make kind of like the statements of like things that, you know, things were so much simpler in like the 1950s or whatever, right?
Yeah.
like there's an appeal to that, right? Unless you were Black or a woman, right? like things were better in the 50s. Like, okay, yeah, like for some people, yeah. And so I think we kind of like give that spit shine or that gloss to things to try to make ourselves feel better, or like even maybe sometimes too, you know, I think like I've heard the kind of thing from clients where they say things, you know, like, well, my raging, abusive, alcoholic father was a good man. Like he just didn't have the skills that he needed. And it's like, I get that, right? And there's no doubt that there can be truth to some of that. And like he hurt you.
Yeah.
Right? Like that has to be dealt with too. Like you it's great that you have compassion for him and some level maybe of like understanding, right? But it's a different thing when you glaze over something that was really hurtful to you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. For fear of actually confronting it, for fear of drawing a boundary.
Yeah.
Right. Which is also kind of like very hard in our interpersonal situations. For fear of naming something as difficult. Because there's comfort, like because here's the bottom line. I think like there's a very deep sort of spiritual lesson to all of this. Like reality is hard, but real.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, one of the kind of core postures of our spiritual life is to stop dealing in fantasies and start dealing in reality. You know, like we are not meant to deal with our projections of people that we have in our imaginations. We're like meant to love our neighbor as who he is. And we're meant to not have our own sort of propped up sense of who we are. We're meant to like confess our sins. Like the point of the spiritual life, right? The point of being a Christian, the God of the living and the dead, the one who is, right? Like we're meant to deal in reality, and illusions, projections, all these sorts of things can be like easy to control, comforting, safe. We have a selective memory when it comes to that sort of stuff. Like, you know, you look back into the past and you idealize it. You know, oh man, everything was better during the Byzantine Empire. Like I say, as I tweet, right. Not knowing that like, I probably would have been like a, you know, a peasant back then, just mathematically.
Yeah. Right. Certainly I would have found myself under a very generous lord.
Yes, I would have enjoyed the freedom to speak and tweet back in the Byzantine Empire.
Yeah.
You know, or any other sort of like, you know, empire, Russian, whatever, right? I mean, like that's the thing. We idealize it and we have this sort of this patina of sort of gold or silver, but it's not true. You know, we're all Wandas on some level, even if we don't have the ability to make an entire town disappear and become meat puppets that do our bidding.
Yeah, right. I love that she called them meat puppets, by the way. I was like, ew. Like that's like that phrase is so disgusting to me. Like, ugh.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think we do kind of try to like create our own realities, instead of confronting what's real, and what's really in front of us. Like, no, like you really did have a time when things made sense and now they don't. You really did, you know, have a very conflicted relationship with your dad. And now he's gone. That's hard, you know, or you should have had a good relationship with him and you didn't, right? Like he did hurt you and he really shouldn't have done that. And like, that's not to blame or point fingers or whatever, but it's like this issue of, I think, of kind of being able to like actually stare our pain in the face so that we can feel it and deal with it, you know, and have it carried. You know, I think like part of the problem is it's like we have these experiences where like we go through these moments where suddenly those parts of us that are hurting get, you know, start carrying these burdens, right? Like that they somehow can't unload. And so we find all these other ways to like manage that or cope with that, you know? And I think until we find ways to like unburden our pain, to no longer, not to not feel it, but to not carry it as a burden. Does that make sense? You know what I'm saying? Like the difference of that?
Yeah.
Like Wanda is burdened by her pain. She doesn't feel it. She's burdened by it. And unless we do something with that, then it's I think it will just keep having power over us in ways that we don't understand. And we may wonder like, why is everybody against me, and why did it? But it's really like, no, you're kind of doing this to yourself a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was what was interesting, is that like Wanda's grief really did make her the bad guy for the majority of the season.
Yes. Terrifyingly so.
Yes. Whereas the guy who's painted as the bad guy is like, she's a threat. Like, this is you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, we got to stop her. And everyone's like, no, she's going through things. Like, no, she is like mind raping people. like
yes.
That is what is happening.
Yeah.
Right? Like, she is like taken away everything. She's locked children in closets. Like, this is a hostage situation.
Yes. Yes. With no ability for resolution, because there's no SWAT team that can like enter the building
until she just decides that she's like, okay, I did my thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's terrifying, right? I mean, it's like this person with godlike powers. I mean, there's like speculation about Wanda. Like, is she really the strongest person in the MCU? Is she like stronger than Thanos? Right? You see what she's able to do without access to, any of the Infinity Stones or anything. She's just able to like control who knows how many people at an incredible distance. Just mold reality to her.
And then she can level up somehow too.
Yeah, because then like, at the end of the series,
she's like, rah!
It's more coercion. Yeah.
More.
Yeah, basically Kylo with brain powers. Yeah.
Yes. He's already got some of those going on. He's scary if he could do other things too.
Oh goodness, yeah. Oh, petulant sort of adolescent Kylo. But that's the thing. Like she puts herself into this position of a child, right? I mean, she's like, it's interesting that Wanda, who is not processing her grief, like is kind of reverting to prior examples of her grief. She's kind of reverting to that scared child in the apartment in Sokovia where the bomb comes in, right? Mm-hmm. And she finds comfort in the DVDs that her dad would bring her. This whole thing, right, is this like these deep wounds, right, that are psychological and emotional and spiritual, which manifest in a very physical sort of way. Because again, she lets the pain control her, and it literally controls the world around her.
Well, and what is interesting too is like there's that fine line, right, between I think even like what Wanda does, which is to protect herself from the pain, right, to manage it, to keep it, try to push it away, and she does that by escaping and controlling people and all of this kind of stuff. Which, again, I think we all do that in some ways, right? Like we have different ways of managing our own pain and grief, and some control other people, some manipulate other people in different ways, right? But at the end of the day, we're all kind of manipulating the world to not feel pain.
Yeah.
Right. We're using people or substances or whatever, right? Work, to try to not feel our pain. And I don't think we're doing those things just to do that, right? But like, I think there is a reality where that happens too, right? Where we do. But like the thing that makes Agatha, I think, particularly a frightening villain for Wanda is that she forces her not just to, it's not like she's making her process the pain, she's making her relive it, right? Which is different. Remembering and reliving are different things. And so like when she goes into it, and I was actually really curious as to how that part was going to play out when she's like in the apartment and she's like, it's your line, if she was going to interact as an adult with that memory.
Yeah.
But she didn't. It was a trauma that she was re-experiencing, reliving, and like all those other things that she saw too were like these reliving things. And I think that maybe that's the fear that a lot of us have, is that like if we don't make a giant, hex around us, then we're gonna just relive the pain. Whereas I don't think that's always the case. I do think probably a lot of us have trauma, of different, whether capital T or not,
Yeah.
And I think COVID has been a trauma, I do.
Yeah.
I do feel like it's been a thing that is kind of perfectly recreated circumstances under which all of us received our traumas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's something that, you're putting out in, I think, the next episode of Wandering the Desert, which I think is going to be a really interesting analysis, right? Because it's like that's, I think, a really important thing about those soul wounds, the way that they're more than memories, right? They're kind of like they're present tense realities for us. Like when a trauma is a thing that is relived, it's not simply a thing that's remembered. In the same way that, like, when Wanda goes into this, right, she's not interacting with this scene as her adult with decades of maturity, right, and the ability to process. She kind of reverts to the age of that trauma.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, right? Like the death of Vision is this thing that kind of unlocks this pre-existing trauma and sort of reverts her back to this childhood. And you raise this really interesting thesis about the way that COVID, which is this big picture sort of trauma, which is isolating us from the normal busy work that we use to gloss over it, right? Our own little sort of WandaVision that we use to get over the fact that whatever it might be, right? The time that a dog scared us when we were a kid, the time that we saw our parents arguing, whatever it is, right? Like, and potentially worse things. And that's one of the challenges, like the mental health challenges that we faced as a society over the past year, which I think is something we've talked about a lot. Like, it's not that COVID is necessarily causing new traumas or causing new problems, like for the church, it's new ministry challenges, whatever it is. On some level, sure, but also on some level, it's like it's revealing stuff that we've just spent a heck of a lot of time and energy ignoring and papering over for a long time. Like loneliness is this thing that Americans have been suffering with for decades. We say, like, COVID is making us lonely because we're all sort of isolated. Like, no, 60% of us have said we were lonely back in 2018. When we had the ability to leave our houses and go to parties and whatever it is, but we didn't.
Yeah.
Right. Or we did things in a superficial way and didn't actually connect with people. Like, we were lonely when we had the chance. COVID just sort of like shone a light on our loneliness by giving us this trauma to rewind us to that moment of trauma.
Yeah. To recreate the circumstances in which that pain was first caused. Right. Like, which really, I mean, when you think about all of that, right? Like, traumas really emerge when we have a felt sense of powerlessness. Like, that's kind of that's an essential component, right? Like, there's nothing that I can do. And another essential component to it is like that there's also no protection, right? Like, no one can, like the people who, especially when you're younger, like the people who are supposed to protect you can't. Yeah. Right. Or you feel like they can't. And there's a lot of reasons maybe that you feel like they can't. It's not that they don't care, they whatever, but maybe, mom was super fragile. And so, like, that time that kid beat you up at school, you couldn't really talk to her about it because you were afraid it would upset her. Yeah. Right. Because she cared, but at the same time, you didn't have the kind of relationship with mom or whatever that was like, she would come to your aid and be like, so what are you going to do about it? Like, how are we going to do, how are we going to deal with this? And all of that, you just know she would have been like, oh my God, I can't believe that you're never going to that school again. You're right. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't want that to happen. So I'm not going to share this really painful thing that happened to me that I had no control over. And like, that's a trauma now. Yeah. Right. So
it's like not really the thing itself, right? It's our response. It's our response to the thing.
The circumstances around which the thing happens. Like, the same event can happen to people, but one person can be traumatized and one person can be not. Like, there's actually surprisingly very little trauma, at least that I've seen. Like, I've seen multiple researches or things that point to this, like around 9/11. Yeah. Like, not a lot of people have trauma over 9/11 because even though it was this horrible thing that happened, people who were there could run away. Yeah. People, right. So there was no sense of power. They weren't like locked in closets while this was happening. Yeah. Right. Had they been, that probably would have been a trauma. And it certainly is a terrible event, but like not in the capital T sense, right? Like it's a horrible memory. It was a traumatic event. Absolutely. But to have it kind of be lodged as a trauma, no, a lot of people have not because they were able to run away. Yeah. So, I think what we all probably are experiencing now is something similar where it's like, there is a sense of powerlessness that we have over all of this stuff. Like, we've been locked at home. We've, not known what to do. And the things that we normally do to protect ourselves from pain, we no longer really have access to. Going to work, going to parties, going to, all those kind of managing activities that we have. All we have is like these reactive protectors that try to put out pain, right? Like binging Netflix and drinking, like whatever, right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
These kinds of things that we just try to flood or wash the pain away with. So I think there is that level of feeling abandoned by our protectors as well. Not to mention, I think in some sense, really, like you could even point to like some of like the response from like leadership around the world as being not particularly helpful, right? Like the people who were supposed to protect us didn't.
Yeah. On a variety of levels and in a variety of ways, right? There's anger at political leaders, social leaders, church leaders. I mean, lots.
Yeah. So I think that there is a lot. I think that is explaining why we have such an increase in like that, the depression and even in the suicide rate. I mean, like has gone through the roof too, right? And I think that's because it's the last thing that people have access to keep them from feeling their pain.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like it's coming in trying to rescue them, but in the process ends up killing them.
Yeah, which is not, and it shows you kind of, I think, the depth of that wound and the depth of that disconnection from reality, right? That this finality can seem like an escape, which it's not, But I mean, like that's how deep these wounds are, which is incredibly tragic. And I think that's sort of like that trauma model actually, like I think just says a lot about trends that we've seen in society over the last year. Like we've seen the rise of like new authority figures, right? I mean, I think there's a reason why like certain kind of like conspiracy theory thinking has sort of gone up through the roof, because it gives you a different narrative and it gives you like new heroes to trust, right? Like it's these guys that are taking down the cabal and whatever. Like it's somebody else that you can sort of hang your hat on in a trusting sort of posture.
Right. Because the old protectors have abandoned us, right?
Yeah.
Like that's really kind of essentially what it comes down to, is like government can't be trusted because mom and dad aren't there for you.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, that really is kind of what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't matter.
There may be a whole variety of reasons we shouldn't trust the government.
But for me, what's really interesting is that like the new thing that we hang our hat on, like the new thing that we imbue with this trust and authority, like it doesn't matter if it's true or not. What simply matters is like that's where we're putting our trust, right? Like Wanda puts her trust in this fake bubble. I mean, like it's interesting. I was listening to this podcast, which was like the history of QAnon, right? Which has become this like thing that's percolating in all sorts of elements of society. And you can draw like, it's a really interesting history that sees the genesis of a lot of that as like Chan culture, like online message board culture in like 1990s Japan, and the level of sort of like trolling and sort of posturing and whatever that happens there, which gradually makes its way to America. And like, it's all lies and illusions and sort of stuff, right? Which is now makes sense for some of us and gives us a sort of grounding. So we kind of accept it, right? It doesn't matter whether it's true or not. What matters is like we in our age of authenticity sort of invest it with meaning and we declare it true.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of like where you were going with some of that, like, we all live in our own WandaVision kind of stuff, right? Like that I do think that like this show in particular kind of, here we go with like the secular 3 thing and the cross pressure, right?
Always.
There's a lot to be said, I think, in how this show lives in that.
Yeah.
Right. She's given the power to make her own world and to make changes as she sees fit, and trying to give herself the comfort that she needs. And like, that is age of authenticity stuff, right? Like we're just stuck within our own hexes, trying to make significance for ourselves. And like everyone else kind of is a prop.
Yeah.
And I think this is what happens when we unhinge ourselves from, like the story of the cosmos, the great transcendent story.
Yeah.
So she makes her own sitcom and all of that. And it's like, it's unhinged. It's unhinged from anything outside of itself, completely unhinged.
Yeah. As are we.
Yeah.
As are we. I mean, we invest fantasies with meaning. We invest sort of ourselves with meaning. We turn ourselves into personal brands and whatever. We just get sort of like so sort of self-obsessed and whatever. And there are all these coping mechanisms, right? That protect us from this deep sense of malaise and meaninglessness. And like, I mean, for those of you who haven't listened to us talk about the secular 1, 2, 3 stuff, because I guess it's been a couple of episodes since we talked about it. You know, we're not going to rehash it now. I can't remember the last episode that we talked about it. We talk about it in a video on YouTube called How to Make Ministry Better and More Christ-Centered. We talk about it in Effective Christian Ministry. Just a little footnote if you're lost in the conversation, if you're a new listener, for which I apologize.
Go
but
back
those are places
and listen
to catch
to
up.
all episodes of Pop Culture Coffee Hour until you feel like you get the hang of what we're talking about. Pause this, go do your homework. There's only about 156 other episodes you got to work through.
Yeah. We'll see you in 156 hours.
Yes. Well,
55.
Some of those are very long.
That's true, actually. It's over 200 hours. That's certainly true.
Wow. Sorry, guys. Sorry to everybody for having to listen to us for... That's a lot of time. I feel sorry
self-awareness.
I feel sorry for everybody.
It's all voluntary. Nobody has to be here.
Or do they?
Dun, dun, dun.
You just got Wanda'd.
Vision comes in, touches your temples. I don't want to be here.
Yeah. You can leave whenever you want, but just not yet.
Yeah. Every time you try to leave, construction happens.
Yes.
It's a red light that never ends.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah.
And then you find yourself sitting out in like a director's chair outside of the ice cream truck, talking to the camera, being like, why am I giving this interview? And then you fly away. But anyway, yeah. So again, those are just footnotes. But yeah, it's like, I think these are kind of expressions of this underlying, you know, we live in this age where the transcendent has really been sort of subtracted from our lives. And we kind of like, we don't like it. It is what it is. I mean, these are the assumptions that we sort of deal with as modern people. And one of our kind of coping mechanisms in this world that feels so flat and empty, right? Kind of a grief unprocessed, is to try to reimagine meaning into a world that we kind of feel has lost its meaning. You know, it's the reason why concerts give us sometimes like this transcendent experience, right? Or a hike, you know, like we're desperately looking for things that re-expand the universe into something that's not purely physical. But the way that we do it as modern people, right? It's still like us being Wanda creating these fictions as opposed to like actually opening up ourselves to the real 3-dimensional story that's out there.
Right. Right. And yet that story continues to try to break through. Right. And that's what's interesting, I think, with Wanda, is that there are moments when you see reality breaking through, like, you know, like the dead vision stuff. But there's also like moments where like the helicopter lands and the guy in the bee suit, right? Like you start having these moments where you're like, oh, like something's happening, right? She just doubles down on all of it. And
reality
like,
is intruding.
Things, rewrites things, you know, exactly. You know, like even with Agatha, right? You start getting this like idea of something breaking in, some story that exists outside of the hex, right? About the Scarlet Witch and all of that kind of stuff. There's a mythos that's presented, and I think we when reality for us begins to break through, it scares us. I think. Because it's like, oh no, the whole so we try to make the hex even bigger.
Yeah.
More coercion.
Because if reality is real, it means we're not safe, right? It means like there's something outside of our control that can pop our little bubble and change us or challenge us. Mm-hmm. You know, because I think that the sort of the conceit of illusion, which Wanda has within her little, you know, pixelated red bubble, is that she consciously or unconsciously is like in charge of everything. Like there's nothing that is happening in there that is against her will. There are no threats there. Her family is safe. Everything is fine. And I think we as modern people, right? Again, this like secular 3 people who exist in this world, like one of the things that we've talked about before is this sense of like the buffered self. Like there's comfort in sort of realizing that like there is no God in heaven who can reach out to me and say, sell everything you have, give it to the poor and follow me. I get to pick what my religious path looks like. There's nobody out there who's challenging me. Like the point is it makes me comfortable in the midst of the discomfort of existence. And like these things happen here where reality begins intruding and it makes her uncomfortable. And like, the punchline of all of this is she has to sort of give up the illusion. She has to let these slaves free, which but under her own will, she wouldn't do it. It seems like she was happy, like spending the rest of her life. I mean, who knows how long the Scarlet Witch can live, right? If she can keep herself longer for a period of time, like she could have been in there for decades, centuries. We don't know. Yeah. She was totally happy using these meat puppets. Controlling everything, orchestrating everything. Nothing in this bubble happens that is not consistent with my will. That's kind of, I think
there is some argument though as to whether or not she realized the extent to which she was doing that, until the very end when she starts actually seeing the pain, right? But I think that like all of that is like that pops her bubble, right? Like that she's realizing that she is causing pain, and at the end of the day, like she's a hero, right? So like she can't, in good conscience, I think, keep going on with that, But she does have to learn how to wrestle with these parts of her, right? That are selfish and controlling and whatever when she's in pain.
Yeah.
But I think that like one of the things that she, that you realize kind of increasingly, because it's like, it is like you kind of go on that journey with her, right? Like where it's so fun and you're like, oh, it's Dick Van Dyke and da 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 da, and it's just like, oh, this is such a fun show. But you kind of begin realizing like, oh, these are actual people that are in there with her, underneath her spell. And like, that's when you start feeling kind of like, oh boy, So the fact is that even though it feels like it's this age of authenticity, me and myself and my whatever, kind of on my path, Wanda doing that enslaves an entire town, right? Like there is no just her doing that by like her doing her. Like her doing her is mind torture.
Yeah.
And like
they're doing her too. Like they're doing her sort of will.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I think like, I also feel like that's been one of the interesting things I think about COVID, right? Is like, I think we have been living in these isolated bubbles, kind of atomized, not only in America, but I think all throughout the world, where we don't really realize the extent of our connectedness to one another and to all things all over. And this little virus, I think in a way that is really beautiful, has maybe like opened to us the reality of kind of a global village in some sense, right? That this is one world and we are all one flesh, like we are homoousios with each other.
Yeah.
And
which we forget.
Like, that there's no such thing as different ousios for Usi.
That sounds like a breakfast cereal. Ousios.
It's the breakfast of Greek champions.
Would you like your daily bread? Have ousios.
It's very yummy for my tummy. Well.
Part of a balanced breakfast. But you're right. I mean, like, this is like, I mean, coincidentally, providentially, right now we're having this conversation on the verge of Forgiveness Sunday, which is coming up on Sunday, right? And like, one of the things that I think people don't get about Forgiveness Sunday, because it feels like a sham for a lot of us, right? How is it that we're going around like apologizing to people that we've potentially never met before, or apologizing to people when we've never interacted, right? Like, but it's again this Elder Zosima and Dostoevsky, right? This very sort of Orthodox Christian idea that like I am the chief among sinners, I am guilty of all before all, and because we are all connected, right? Like there are no sins that I do in private. There is no sort of thing that I do kind of like alone in my spare time when the lights are out and the curtains are drawn. Like everything I do is either advancing the cosmic story of salvation and reconciliation of things with the Lord, or undoing his work. And that's the reason why, my thinking thoughts in my head even is something that I need to ask forgiveness of everybody for, because we are this village, right? We are this body, and we're connected in more like existentially deep ways than we realize. It's not nation versus nation or me versus you or political spectrum versus political spectrum. Like here we are ideally asking forgiveness of each other, realizing that like this is our shared space, the shared space of salvation in which we should be dwelling. And it took this like smack in the face, right, to get us to start thinking about it.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is I think like, because now I'm even thinking too about like Wanda needs to probably ask forgiveness from everybody.
Sure.
Literally everyone.
Literally.
But like it's interesting because like she just kind of like gets away with it. You know? Like, and it's hard because it's like, that's really unfair.
Yeah.
You know, like there's just, I don't know. Like why, like so, I mean, there's a lot to that, right? Like she has all this power. And so she gets to use it to mess with people's minds to keep herself from feeling pain. But others have to pay the price for it. You know, like
they feel her pain.
Yes.
They dream her nightmares at night.
And then like she comes out of it, right? And she's like, well, I guess everyone thinks I'm a monster now, huh? And then like Rambo is just like, it's cool. You've been through a lot. Your boyfriend died. So it's weird because it feels like at the end of the day, what happens is that because she has all of this like power, like she doesn't actually have to be accountable for how she used it. Instead, it just actually blames the victims for being upset that they were imprisoned. Like, it's weird.
Which I feel like is such an American thing, right? I feel like this is an example of like too big to fail has become sort of one of our national mottos, I think, as Americans. Like there's just at some point you are big enough and powerful enough where you can like crash the global economy and you get to be bailed out for it, right? Like you're sort of big enough and powerful enough when you get to enslave a town and you just sort of get to retire by the seaside for it. You know, because like what happens to all of those people who dreamed her nightmares for all of these years? And you know, like we're sort of like conscious of themselves as being used and manipulated. And like that, this is a town full of traumatized people.
Yes.
Right. If you want to think about the actual consequences of this. And I can't tell if like even that sort of American instinct that we have is this like, kind of like you were saying at the top of the show, like, oh, I know my father is a drunk or this and that, but he means well, or I know this person has done sort of like, we have this non-confrontational sort of thing, or there's something about us, right, that is very willing to not forgive. No, it doesn't seem like it's forgiveness. It feels like not addressing the problem.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because like I think we're happy to put blame places, but I think we put them in the wrong place sometimes. Like again, I think that like at the very end of the show, it seems like the people of Westview, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Westview.
Yeah.
Like essentially it feels like they're the ones who get blamed.
Yeah.
And even like the bad guy, you know, who wants to bring Wanda down, like when that, you know, when the what's her face? Kat Denning. The
scientist,
I don't remember what her character's name is.
Yeah.
Rufio. I don't know.
We'll go Rufio, that's fine.
When she crashes into him, she's like, have fun in prison.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is he going to prison?
Yeah.
Like he's just doing his job.
I think he was like lying, I guess, at some point. I think they glossed over that a little bit quickly for me too. Like,
yeah,
you know,
it was very unclear to me. I'm like, why is he, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, so she didn't steal Vision, but like we saw a video of her doing something. It looked like we saw her steal him.
But she didn't. The bad general still had Vision and like bleached him and turned him into some sort of like, you know, white version of Vision at the very end.
And that wasn't cool. That came out of nowhere. Like it was just like very weird. Like that, like I don't know. Anyway.
And then he disappeared, by the way, because like, revived Vision, right? Who apparently like he gets his memory back. He talks to projection Vision. It sounds like he sort of accepts that he is Vision now.
So does he go off to destroy himself? Because like that's his directive.
or does he go and like live with Wanda afterwards? Like, you know, because it sounds like minus the memories in the bubble, he is Vision. Like he literally is like revived, resuscitated Vision.
Well, he doesn't have the Mind Stone, so like he only can ever be a robot, right? That's what I understood. I don't know.
I guess. I mean, he has a very sort of interesting conversation with Projection Vision where he's like coming to terms with stuff.
Yeah,
his eyes change, right? Like his eyes become
Yes.
more human at the end.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was weird. It was a weird ending. But anyway, I think what I'm trying to get to is that like
sorry for the tangent.
Like the people who get screwed in this, like, are the ones that aren't the bad guys.
Yeah.
Right? Like Wanda was the bad guy.
Yeah.
And I get that she's going through some stuff.
Aren't we all?
But like, yeah, totally. That doesn't get you off the hook, right? Like there may be some level of understanding and compassion or whatever, but like Wanda needs to be, I think, like in some ways held accountable for the fact that like her great power caused her wounds to leak out in a way that left like total carnage in her wake.
Yeah.
You know, like we got to take responsibility for every part of us.
Yeah.
Not just like, well, I wasn't myself. And like, and we're like, well, yeah, that's what happens when I'm not myself. I do bad things.
Yeah.
I should probably figure that out.
Yeah.
Like I need to take responsibility for that part too.
And this, I think, is actually like important in this sort of cosmic sense of justice. Because even sometimes as Americans inspired by, whatever kind of post-Reformation Christianity, we think of like justice as punishment or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But in a deeper sense, it's just things being put right is really what justice is. Like the ancient Greeks actually talked about it. Like Aristotle would talk about justice as everything being in their right place. I think this is something that's implicit in kind of the sort of Hebraic sort of Old Testament understanding. Like things are put in their right place. And what we see as Wanda leaves Westview at the end of episode 9, like things are very much not in their right place. Like people come to mind, they're in the street, not knowing how they got there, and she just bounces.
And crap's everywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's like bullet holes and like
the laser from Vision's head has like sliced, open entire boulevards or whatever it is.
Yeah. She's
like that's part of the thing. Like even if her last act was to clean up the town before she left. Like even that would feel sort of more restorative.
But instead it's kind of like, why is everybody so mad at me? Like, they just see me bad now.
Do you know what you did?
Yeah. Let's have one moment of reflection. Just a moment.
Can you please conjure up a chair?
Yeah. I didn't do anything bad. They're just hurt. Look, I'm sorry your feelings are so hurt by the mind control. All right. Is that better? Are you happy now? Sorry your feelings are hurt. Like, stop apologizing for our hurt feelings. Like, can you instead apologize for enslaving us? That would be great.
Yeah. I've spent the last 3 weeks in the dark closet, just sitting there.
Yeah. But I feel like it's, I mean, that to me is kind of, I think what happens when power is so concentrated in a particular place, right? That it's like power gets to just like wipe everything out and destroy things.
Yeah.
Because it has its own agenda or whatever. And then the people who are left in the wake end up having to do the apologizing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, sorry, we were right here where you were blasting through, right? Like,
yeah.
Moved out of the road.
And that's one of our contemporary traumas, right? Because like when that happens, which I think happens politically, economically, religiously, whatever it is, like that again, to take this like full circle, that's when we see the people who are supposed to be doing the right thing, the authority structures, the power structures in our society, the leadership, whatever it is. Like when that happens, that's a trauma, that displaces a piece of you. The people who are on top are actually just like looking out for their own skin, or they do these terrible things and then they get to sort of like, retire to their seaside resort. Like it hurts. And then like the question is, what do we do with that trauma? Because a lot of us have just sort of put other sort of false things in their wake as a coping mechanism, but like the trauma remains.
Yeah. And the hard thing is like, there is no justice there. You know what I mean? Like there won't be justice there for Wanda.
Yeah.
Right. Like if there's a season 2 of WandaVision, it will not be her trial. It'll be her moving on to do something else kind of wacky.
Yeah.
Which I don't really see how they could have a season 2. Like it seemed like a pretty, like they did what WandaVision was.
Yeah.
You're gonna go start a new television show, or maybe she'll just move to Hollywood and become an actual television, producer.
She's
like,
going to
I'm
get
done
her
with this
own
whole
angry
superhero
YouTube
gig.
channel.
Yeah.
That's a good question, actually, because like any season 2 is going to have to be like a radically different sort of tone,
Mhm.
or it's going to be like the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. like second half of the season, which is again sort of more black and white Marvel. Like it's part of that kind of like, we know what we're getting out of Marvel. Like what was I think so lovely about this was it was unexpected, and it had this layer of like emotional and psychological like
Totally.
depth, which was wonderful. And the problem is like it stumbles at the end because that last bit is very superficial.
Mhm.
And I don't know what justice looks like ultimately, right? Like she cleans up
neither
the
do I.
town. She's got to look everybody in the face and be like, hey, sorry, I enslaved you for the last couple of months. Like, I don't know what it looks like.
Yeah.
It's not just like inflicting pain upon her, right? Sometimes we think of judgment as like, well, she's got to be tortured for like, no, that's not justice. But she also abandoned these people to their trauma. Like that's it. Like literally, they're just kind of standing around there like, whoop, I'm me again. And she flies away.
Yeah. Yeah. She's like, well, this is kind of a lame party. So
it was better when Vision was here. Whoop.
Yeah. And then again, it's so weird that the way that Monica, and I think maybe because she's like in her own grief too, like over her mom, but she's just like, it was such a weird line. They'll never know what you sacrificed for them. It's like, no, she did not do something noble here.
Yeah.
Right. She did something that she should have done.
Yeah.
Which is like process her grief.
Yeah.
Because she didn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like, as we're sort of, we're kind of at the end of our hour to begin even like wrapping up, like this occurs to me, like even what to say something about like what that processing looked like because I feel like there's two things that are coming out in my mind as how does Wanda go from like the tyrant in the box to somebody who actually sort of begins to process it? Like she shares it, right? She has these conversations with Vision. She has kind of a conversation power. She's able to organize and articulate, and she sort of ends with hope, which I think is really beautiful. Like I think back to that last exchange that she had with Vision, which I think is very touching, where she's like, we've said goodbye before. It only stands to reason that we'll say hello again. Like there's like she's sort of like she's able to process his death in the hope of the resurrection, which is a very kind of like lovely thing. Like she shares, she organizes, right? Words, logos, like she begins to sort of make sense of this chaos in her heart. And she ends just sort of like with this posture of hope. Like, I hope that I will see you again.
Yeah.
Again, very sort of like Christological and lovely at the end.
Yeah. So she can carry her pain as a legacy instead of like as a burden.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's something that's like, not only will I kind of accept what's happened and honor that, but with a renewed hope, like, right.
Yeah.
Like that. Okay. I'll live forward from here rather than trying to keep something that I lost back there.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I mean by like carrying it as like a legacy, right? Like living forward.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting because I mean, I do think it's got to be shared, it's got to be opened, and admit that it's there. But it's hard because then it does mean like Vision goes away.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And he stays away.
Yeah. Yep.
I think about this, like, even in terms of like losing my dad, which I've talked about like in past episodes, like there's no amount of processing my grief brings him back or any of the other people that I've lost in my life, right? Any sort of severed relationship, like the relationship is different, right? But it's like, the posture of now praying for my dad, right, in the hope of the resurrection, is like very different than just kind of like weeping over him and sort of like thinking backwards, right? Like it's that posture of processing and living forwards. Pain never goes away. It's just, and that's that Vision quote, right? What is grief if not love persevering? Like when grief gets processed, what is the next act of love, that I can do. I can pray for this person that I've lost. I can remember them in my heart and like lift them up to the Lord and not just kind of like jealously guard. The posture shifts a little bit. It stinks, like it still stings, but living forward.
But it's a love persevering rather than a pain being avoided.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, WandaVision.
Good stuff.
It was a show that was a television one where things happened and people were on it.
It was a show that was multiple shows.
It was like a show within a show within a show.
Meta.
Yes.
So shall we end our a slightly abbreviated coffee hour with a little philanthropy corner at the end?
Sure. Do it up.
Cool. Yeah. So this week we're going to highlight something that you might have heard of before. It's called the Philoptochos, which literally means friends of the poor. It's the philanthropic arm of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. And it fulfills its mission to help the poor, the destitute, the hungry, the aged, the sick, the unemployed, the orphaned, the imprisoned, the widow, those with disabilities, and the victims of disasters through its National and Metropolis Boards, its 26,000 members, and more than 400 active chapters nationwide. It's really a wonderful organization that responds to needs in crises. Back in 2019, they distributed $1.7 million in philanthropic aid to a host of sources. And I think it's worth highlighting them because I grew up in a Greek Orthodox parish as a kid. And I think as a kid, I had this sense that Philoptochos was sort of for the grandmothers. But it's been cool. Like I've seen actually a lot of my friends, people my age, younger than me, women who've joined Philoptochos and are doing really, I think, important things like, paying for and delivering groceries to people in need during this time of the pandemic and offering rent assistance to families that are struggling, like big things, little things, especially over the course of the last year in a world where so many people have met a lot of economic distress. And I've had really interesting conversations with the leadership of Philoptochos. They have a lot of really cool ideas that are sort of coming down the pike as well. So, if there's a chapter in your parish, it's worth taking a look at. It's worth getting involved with because it is the philanthropic arm of the church, and they're doing a lot of wonderful things. And if you're interested in being involved philanthropically, they're a place to start. Go to philoptochos.org for more info. The link is down in the doobly-doo. I'm not going to spell it for you, Greek word, whatever. The link is down in the doobly-doo. But I'd say check them out. And that's for today's Philanthropy Corner.
Huzzah! Philoptochos Philanthropy Hour.
That's right.
So
although it wasn't a full hour, just a touch, a smidge.
Philoptochos Philanthropy Full Hour.
Falafel Hour. I don't falafel. I actually feel good that we got to talk about a lovely show that might have stumbled at the finish line, but I think overall was beautiful. Yeah.
Yes. I give it a 9.2 out of 10.
I think that's fair.
Or maybe an 8 out of 10. 4 out of 10.
Man. I heard the whistling of air as it began to plummet.
Much like how the New York Times gave Guy Fieri's Times Square restaurant 0.2 out of 4 stars.
In the greatest culinary review in the history of culinary reviews. It's so just, it's a masterpiece. Yeah, they should teach that in English classes in the future. It's just so good.
Yes. Go look it up. Link in the doobly-doo.
Yeah. I should at this point. I'll go back and I'll edit it.
Put it in the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
all right.
That's it for now.
Well, see you in a couple weeks.
So are we doing Atlanta next time? Are we doing Schitt's Creek next time? What are we doing? Atlanta? Okay. Yeah. So next time it is Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And then possibly Schitt's Creek after that. We'll see. But we'll let you know.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah. Don't rush us.
Yeah, stop the pressure, everybody. Good grief. All righty. Well,